Have you ever stood in the center of a crowded room, screaming at the top of your lungs in your own mind, yet not a single person turned to look at you? There is a specific kind of silence that wraps around the people who keep the world running, the ones who scrub the floors, change the sheets, and pour the coffee. It is a silence not of peace, but of erasure. You become furniture. You become architecture. You become invisible. For Nia, this invisibility was not just a feeling, it was a uniform. Every morning at 5 a.m., she pulled on the dark blue dress with a stiff white collar, the fabric scratching slightly against her neck, a tactile reminder of her place in the hierarchy. The dress was designed to be forgettable, to blend into the shadows of the hallways so that the wealthy guests of the Obsidian Grand Hotel would never have to acknowledge the labor that made their luxury possible. Nia was 25. With eyes that held a depth of intelligence she had learned to mask with a lowered gaze, and a grace in her movement that was wasted on pushing a heavy cleaning cart. But the guests didn't see Nia. They saw a pair of hands that replaced towels. They saw a back that retreated into service elevators. They never saw the mind that was racing at 1,000 miles an hour, dissecting the world around her, hungry for something more than the smell of lemon polish and industrial bleach. What no one at the Obsidian Grand knew, not her exhausted coworkers, and certainly not her supervisor, Mr. Hargrave, was that Nia lived a double life inside her head. In the quiet hours of the night, in her cramped studio apartment where the heating rattled and the sirens wailed outside, she did not watch reality TV or scroll mindlessly through social media. She studied. She was obsessed with the structure, the rhythm, and the melody of the Korean language. It had started years ago, an accidental discovery of a drama that led to a fascination with the culture, which then deepened into a rigorous, self-taught discipline. She consumed textbooks, practiced pronunciation with language apps until her tongue ached, and shadowed news anchors until her accent was indistinguishable from a native speaker's. Korean was her secret garden. It was a place where she wasn't just a cleaner, she was a linguist, a scholar, someone capable of complex thought and articulation. But at work, she kept her lips sealed. The hotel had a strict policy. Staff were to be seen and not heard, and certainly not heard speaking anything other than yes, sir, or right away, ma'am. To reveal her skill would be to step out of line, to challenge the carefully curated ecosystem where she was at the bottom. So, she kept her head down, clutching her secret like a diamond in a pocket full of dust, waiting for a moment she never truly believed would come. The universe, however, has a funny way of answering the silent prayers of the overlooked. It rarely sends a gentle invitation. Usually, it sends a storm. That storm arrived on a Tuesday, in the form of a guest who bought out the entire penthouse floor. The rumor mill in the basement locker room was on fire. They said he was royalty or a tech mogul, or perhaps something darker, something more dangerous. The name on the manifest was just a corporation, but the man himself, Park Min-jun, was a presence that sucked the air out of the lobby when he arrived. Nia had seen him briefly from the mezzanine, a man of perhaps 35, wearing a suit that cost more than her entire life's earnings, with a jawline that could cut glass and eyes that scanned the perimeter with the weary vigilance of a predator. He was handsome, devastatingly so, but there was a coldness to him that warned people to keep their distance. Nia was assigned to the penthouse detail not because she was the best, but because she was the quietest. She was the ghost who could drift in and out without disturbing the atmosphere. As she pushed her cart toward the golden elevator that required a special key card, her heart hammered a strange rhythm against her ribs. She told herself it was just another room, just another mess to clean, just another day of being invisible. She had no idea that the elevator wasn't taking her up to the penthouse. It was taking her to the edge of a cliff, and she was about to jump. The penthouse suite was less a room and more a kingdom, a sprawling expanse of marble, velvet, and floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. When Nia entered, she adhered to the protocol. Knock 3 times, announce housekeeping softly, wait 10 seconds, and enter only if there was no response. Silence greeted her. She pushed the cart inside, the wheels gliding silently over the plush Persian rugs. The air in the room smelled of expensive cologne, cedarwood, and stale tobacco. She began her routine, moving with the efficiency of a machine, her eyes trained on the surfaces she polished. She was wiping down the glass conference table when the heavy mahogany doors to the bedroom burst open. Nia froze, her instinct to shrink into the nearest shadow kicking in immediately. Park Min-jun stormed into the living area, his jacket discarded, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with tension. He wasn't looking at her. To him, she was part of the decor, less interesting than the vase on the mantel. He was pacing, a phone pressed to his ear, and he was furious. He was speaking Korean, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that escalated into shouting. Nia turned her back, making herself small, scrubbing a spot on the window that was already clean, trying to disappear. But she couldn't help but listen. Her brain automatically translated the torrent of words spilling from his mouth. He was in a negotiation, a critical one. Someone on the other end was misunderstanding the terms of a shipment, referencing a contract clause that didn't exist, and Min-jun's frustration was boiling over because the interpreter on the conference line had dropped out or was incompetent.
No.
That is not what the breakdown implies. Min-jun shouted in Korean, slamming his hand onto the table, inches from where Nia was polishing. The timeline is non-negotiable. Tell them if they miss the window, the entire deal dissolves. Are you listening? Who is translating this? They are missing the nuance of the leverage. He paused, listening to the silence or the garbled response on the other end. He groaned, a sound of pure exasperation, and raked his hand through his dark hair. They think I am bluffing because the words are weak. I need them to understand the threat. He looked around the room wildly, as if searching for a solution in the empty air. The person on the other end was speaking English now, loud enough for Nia to hear a tinny voice complaining about a lack of clarity. Min-jun didn't speak English fluently enough to convey the complex legal threat he needed to make, and he knew it. He was trapped in a linguistic cage, watching millions of dollars, or perhaps something more valuable, slip away because of a language barrier. Nia's hands were shaking. She held the microfiber cloth so tight her knuckles turned white. This was the moment. The terrifying precipice moment. The rule book in her head screamed, "Stay silent. Keep cleaning. Do not engage." But the instinct to solve the puzzle, the sheer human urge to bridge the gap, was stronger. She took a breath that felt like inhaling broken glass. She turned around. She didn't look at the floor. For the first time in 3 years, she looked a guest directly in the eyes. "Sir," she said, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting through the tension in the room.
Min-jun stopped pacing.
He looked at her, truly looked at her, with a mix of confusion and irritation, as if a lamp had just started speaking. Before he could dismiss her, she switched. The sounds that came out of her mouth were not the broken, hesitant attempts of a beginner. They were crisp, authoritative, and perfectly in tone Korean. If you reference the force majeure clause in the original addendum, they will understand the timeline is binding. You don't need to threaten them. You need to cite the liability. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, physical silence. Min-jun lowered the phone slowly, his dark eyes widening in genuine shock. He stared at the woman in the blue cleaning uniform, this African-American woman with a duster in her hand, who had just spoken to him in the dialect of his home, with the vocabulary of a contract lawyer. "What did you say?" he asked in Korean, his voice barely a whisper. Nia didn't retreat. She stepped forward, gesturing to the phone. "The interpreter is missing the liability context. May I?" She held out her hand. It was insanity. It was a firing offense. It was the bravest thing she had ever done. Min-jun hesitated for a fraction of a second, analyzing her face, searching for a trap. Then, seeing the desperation of his own situation, he handed her the phone. Nia took the device. It was warm from his grip. She put it to her ear and switched to English, her voice dropping into a professional, icy calm. "Gentlemen, this is Mr. Park's senior associate. We are referencing Clause 4, Section B regarding timeline liability. If the window is missed, the penalty is retroactive. Do you accept these terms, or do we pull the asset immediately?" She listened. There was sputtering on the other end, then a quick, terrified agreement. "Understood," she said. She switched back to Korean, looking Min-jun in the eye. "They have agreed." The retroactive penalty scared them. "The deal is secure." She handed the phone back to him. Min-jun took it, still staring at her as if she were a mythological creature that had just materialized in his suite. He looked at the phone, then back at her. "Who are you?" he asked in English this time. Nia felt the adrenaline crash. The reality of what she had done rushed back in. She wasn't a senior associate. She was a cleaner who was essentially impersonating hotel management. She stepped back, grabbing her cart. "I'm just housekeeping, sir. I apologize for the interruption. I'll finish the bathroom later." She turned to flee, her heart beating so hard she thought she might faint. She needed to get out before he asked her name, before the spell broke and the punishment began. She didn't make it to the door. The elevator chimed, and the heavy doors slid open. Mr. Hargrave, the floor manager, stepped out, his face a mask of obsequious panic. He had likely come to check on the VIP personally. He took one look at the scene. Nia standing in the center of the room, looking flushed and guilty, and Mr. Park staring at her with an intensity that could burn paper, and he drew the worst possible conclusion. "Nia!" Hargrave barked, his voice dripping with venom. "What are you doing? Why are you bothering Mr. Park?" He rushed forward, placing himself physically between Nia and the guest, blocking her from view, as if she were a stain he needed to scrub out. "Mr. Park, I am so terribly sorry. This girl is new. She doesn't know the protocol. I will have her removed immediately. She shouldn't be speaking to you. She shouldn't even be in your eye line." Hargrave turned on Nia, his voice dropping to a hiss. "Get out. Get your cart and get downstairs. You and I are going to have a very long conversation about your future, or lack thereof." Nia felt the familiar cloak of invisibility slam back down on her shoulders. The magic was gone. She was just the help again, being scolded like a naughty child. She risked one glance past Hargrave's shoulder. Minjun was watching the interaction, his expression unreadable, his eyes narrowed.
He didn't speak.
He didn't defend her. He just watched. Nia felt a sharp pang of betrayal. Foolish, really, since he owed her nothing, and dipped her head. "Yes, sir," she whispered to Hargrave. She grabbed the handle of her heavy cart and pushed it out of the suite, the wheels rattling over the threshold, marking the distance between the world of gold and the world of dust. The rest of the shift was a blur of nausea and anxiety. Nia finished her rounds on the lower floors, her hands trembling as she changed pillowcases and scrubbed toilets. Every time her radio crackled, she expected it to be security coming to escort her off the premises. Hargrave hadn't fired her on the spot, likely because he was too busy groveling to the VIP, but she knew it was coming. When she finally clocked out, changing from her blue uniform into her street clothes, jeans, and a worn-out sweater, she felt like she was shedding a skin that had become too tight. She walked out the service entrance, into the biting cold of the city evening. The contrast was stark. Upstairs, men made deals worth millions in seconds. Down here, she counted the change in her pocket to see if she could afford a sandwich, or if it was just ramen again tonight. The bus ride home was long and loud. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the city lights blur. Why had she done it? Why couldn't she just keep her head down? It was the curse of competence. She knew she was worth more, and for 30 seconds, she had proven it. But the world didn't reward people like her for stepping out of line. It punished them. She replayed the scene in her head 100 times. The perfect grammar, the shock on Minjun's face, the silence. And then, Hargrave's intervention. The restoration of order. She climbed the 3 flights of stairs to her apartment, the smell of damp carpet filling her nose, and sat on the edge of her bed. She felt small. She felt foolish. But beneath the fear, there was a tiny, dangerous ember glowing in her chest. She had spoken. She had been heard. And for one moment, she hadn't been invisible. The next morning, the dread was a physical weight on her chest. Walking into the hotel felt like walking to the gallows. The locker room was quiet when she entered, the kind of heavy, loaded silence that meant everyone knew something she didn't. Her coworker, an older woman named Elena, who usually had a kind word or a piece of candy for her, just looked at her with sad, pitying eyes and shook her head. "Hargrave is looking for you," Elena whispered, pretending to dig through her purse. "He's in the general manager's office. He said the minute you clock in, you go up." Nia's stomach dropped. The GM's office. This was it. They weren't just firing her, they were going to make an example of her. Perhaps Minjun had complained. Perhaps she had messed up the deal after all. Nia changed into her uniform with numb fingers. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror of the locker room. This is the last time you wear this, she thought. Maybe that's a good thing. She straightened her spine. If she was going out, she would go out with dignity. She walked through the back corridors, past the laundry chutes and the kitchens, feeling like a ghost haunting the machinery of the hotel. When she reached the executive wing, the air changed, cooler, cleaner, quieter. She approached the administrative assistant's desk. The woman looked up, surprised.
I'm Nyo.
Mr. Hargraves sent for me. The assistant didn't sneer. She didn't hand her a termination slip. She looked confused. She picked up her phone. She's here, the assistant said. Then she looked at Nia. You're not going to the GM's office. You're going to the penthouse, Nia blinked. I don't have my card. I haven't started my rotation. The assistant stood up and walked around the desk, her heels clicking on the floor. You're not cleaning today, Nia. Mr. Park requested you specifically. He's been waiting for 20 minutes. And Mr. Hargrave is already up there, looking like he's about to have a stroke, the world tilted slightly on its axis. Requested? Nia felt a different kind of fear now, the fear of the unknown. She wasn't being discarded. She was being summoned. She walked to the elevators, the gold doors parting for her. She rode up alone, watching the floor numbers tick higher, each digit taking her further away from the life she knew. When the doors opened on the penthouse floor, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Mr. Hargrave was standing by the door, sweating, wringing his hands. When he saw Nia, his face went through a complicated spasm of anger and forced politeness. Nia, he said, his voice strained. Mr. Park has asked to see you. I have explained to him that you are unqualified, that you are merely entry-level staff, but he insists. You will go in there, you will apologize for yesterday, and you will agree to whatever menial task he has. Is that clear? Nia looked at Hargrave. For the first time, he didn't look like a monster. He looked like a small, frightened man afraid of losing his own position. I understand, Nia said calmly. She walked past him. She didn't knock this time. The door was slightly ajar. She pushed it open and stepped into the kingdom. Park Min-jun was sitting at the glass table, surrounded by documents. He wasn't on the phone. He was waiting. He looked up as she entered. He was wearing a different suit today, gray and sharp, but his eyes were the same, intense, calculating. He didn't smile. He didn't look like he wanted an apology. He pointed to the chair opposite him. Sit, he said in English. It was a command, but not a disrespectful one. It was an invitation to the table. Nia hesitated, then walked across the room and sat down. The chair was soft leather, swallowing her slightly. She felt absurd in her cleaning uniform, sitting across from a Mafia boss, or whatever he was. Min-jun studied her for a long moment, tapping a pen against the table. I had my people run a background check on you last night, he said, his voice conversational, as if discussing the weather. Nia Davis. High school valedictorian. Dropped out of college after 2 years because of financial hardship. No criminal record. You live in a studio in the East District. Nia felt a chill run down her spine. Is that a threat? She asked, her voice low. Min-jun smirked, a quick flash of amusement.
No.
It is diligence. I needed to know if you were a spy. If you were planted here by my competitors, he leaned forward, clasping his hands. Because what happened yesterday? That doesn't happen by accident. An American hotel cleaner who speaks the Busan dialect perfectly? Who understands contract law? He shook his head. That is a unicorn. Or a trap. I have decided you are a unicorn. He slid a document across the table toward her. It was a dense page of Korean text, handwritten messy. Read this, he commanded. Tell me what it says. Not the words. The meaning. Nia looked at the paper. It was a letter. A personal letter, but written in code, using metaphors about weather and tides to discuss shipping routes and rival territories. She scanned it, her mind automatically decoding the flowery language into the brutal reality it concealed. She looked up at him. It's a warning, she said. The writer is telling you that the shipment coming through the southern port is compromised. They aren't saying the police are there. They're saying the local authority has changed allegiance. They are using the phrase, the tide is high, to imply that the cost of entry has doubled. If you send the product now, it will be seized. Minjun stared at her. He didn't blink. The silence stretched for 10 seconds, then 20. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling a long breath. My own translator told me it was a weather report, he muttered. He said my uncle was concerned about the rain. Minjun looked at Nia with a new expression, respect. I am surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear, or people who are too stupid to understand what they are reading. I have enemies who smile at me, and staff who fear me, he paused. You have nothing to lose, Nia. That makes you dangerous. And that makes you useful. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, placing it on the table. Then he pulled out a thick envelope. Mr. Hargrave wants to fire you. He thinks you are a liability. I think you are an asset. He tapped the envelope. There is $5,000 in here. That is for yesterday. For saving the deal, Nia's breath hitched. $5,000. That was months of rent. That was freedom. And Minjun continued, his voice dropping lower. This is the offer. I need a personal interpreter. Someone who is not part of the family, someone who can be invisible when I need them to be, and a voice when I need to speak.
You will travel with me.
You will wear clothes that do not smell of bleach. You will be paid more in a week than you make in a year. He leaned in, his dark eyes locking onto hers. But you will see things you cannot unsee. And once you step into my world, you cannot go back to cleaning toilets. You have to choose. Do you want to be safe and invisible? Or do you want to be seen? Nia looked at the envelope. Then she looked at the cleaning cart she had left in the hallway. She looked at her hands, red from scrubbing. She thought of the silence of her apartment. Then she looked at Minjun, a man who offered danger and respect in equal measure. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, not for the money, but for the pen he was holding. I don't need the money to translate, she said softly. I need to know that I won't be silenced. Minjun smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. In my world, Nia, he said, the only people who are silenced are the ones who don't speak up in time. You were just in time. The transition from the invisible world to the visible one did not happen with a fanfare of trumpets, but with a quiet, terrifying slide of a key card across a mahogany desk. Nia accepted the offer, and in doing so, she severed the tether to the only life she had known for the last 5 years. The walk out of the penthouse suite was surreal. She felt weightless, unmoored, as if gravity had suddenly decided to apply different rules to her. When she returned to the basement to clean out her locker, the atmosphere was suffocating. The air smelled of damp wool and industrial chemicals, a scent that had once been the backdrop of her existence, but now felt foreign, like a memory from a childhood she had outgrown. She stripped off the blue uniform for the final time, folding it neatly, not out of respect for the job, but out of a habit of discipline that she refused to break. Mr. Hargrave was waiting for her by the time clock, his face a mixture of confusion and simmering resentment. He had expected to fire her, to wield his small, petty power and watch her crumble. Instead, he was watching her ascend. He opened his mouth to say something, perhaps a final reprimand or a warning that she would be back begging for her job within a week, but Nia didn't give him the chance. She simply nodded at him, a gesture of absolute neutrality, and walked past him. She didn't look down. She didn't apologize for taking up space. She walked out of the service entrance and into a waiting black sedan that Minjun had arranged, the heavy door thudding shut and sealing her inside a capsule of silence and leather. As the car pulled away, Nia looked out the tinted window at the hotel, rising like a monolith against the gray sky. She saw the windows she had washed, the sidewalks she had swept. She realized with a jolt that she wasn't just leaving a job. She was leaving a version of herself that had apologized for breathing. But as the city blurred past, a new fear began to coil in her stomach. She had bluffed her way through one conversation. Now, she had to survive in a world where a wrong word didn't just mean a written warning, it meant catastrophe. The headquarters of the Park Corporation was a fortress of glass and steel in the financial district, a place that projected legitimacy while concealing the razor-sharp edges of the underworld business it fronted. Nia's arrival was met with a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. She was introduced not as a cleaner, but as a special consultant, a vague title that fooled no one in Minjun's inner circle. They smelled the poverty on her. They sensed the lack of pedigree. The primary source of this hostility was Director Han, a man with a smile like a shark and a suit that cost more than the building Nia lived in. Han was Minjun's second-in-command for legitimate operations, a man who prided himself on his education and his bloodline. To him, Nia was an insult. She was a stain on the pristine image of the organization. During her first briefing, sitting at a conference table that felt miles long, Han tested her relentlessly. He spoke in rapid-fire jagged Korean, utilizing obscure idioms and street slang mixed with high-level corporate jargon, deliberately trying to trip her up. He would switch dialects mid-sentence, referencing historical grievances and specific legal precedents without context, watching her with predatory eyes, waiting for her to stumble. The other executives watched in silence, a pack of wolves waiting to see if the new member was weak enough to be eaten. Nia's hands were sweating under the table, her fingernails digging into her palms. Every time she opened her mouth to translate or clarify, she felt the crushing weight of imposter syndrome. Who was she to be here? She was a fraud. She was a girl with a mop who had gotten lucky. When she hesitated over a complex phrase regarding amortized risk in gray zone assets, Han scoffed, a sharp, dismissive sound that echoed in the room. Perhaps, Han said in English, sneering, Mr. Park's charity case should return to changing sheets. The nuance of this business requires breeding, not just a translation app. Minjun did not intervene. He sat at the head of the table, his face a mask of stone, watching Nia. He was letting them hunt her. It was a cruel test, but Nia realized with sudden clarity that he couldn't protect her. If he defended her, she would always be a pet. To survive this, she had to bite back. The days that followed were a grueling marathon of psychological warfare and intellectual exhaustion. Nia was not just learning the business, she was relearning how to exist. She spent her nights in a temporary corporate apartment that felt too large and too empty, surrounded by dossiers and legal briefs Minjun expected her to memorize. The doubt was a constant companion, whispering that she had made a mistake, that safety was better than this high-wire act. One evening, after a particularly brutal session where Han had openly mocked her accent, which was perfect, but he found flaws where there were none, Nia found herself retreating to the rooftop garden of the office building, gasping for air. She leaned against the railing, looking down at the city lights, feeling the urge to run. It was there that she met Mr. E. He was Minjun's personal driver and oldest confidant, a man with white hair and a face etched with the history of 1,000 street fights. He was smoking a cigarette, watching her with eyes that were kind but unyielding. "You are letting him win," Mr. E said softly in Korean, not looking at her. Nia startled, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. "I don't belong here, Mr. E. Director Han is right. I don't know the game," Mr. E chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Han knows the game, yes. But he plays it like a robot. He sees numbers. He sees status." Mr. E turned to her, crushing his cigarette under his heel. "You see the dust. You see the cracks." Nia frowned. "I don't want to see dust anymore." Mr. E shook his head. "You mistake your weakness for your strength, child. A cleaner knows who is messy. A cleaner knows who is hiding things under the bed. A cleaner sees the things powerful men ignore because they are too busy looking in the mirror." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Minjun didn't hire you because you speak Korean. He hired you because you understand invisibility." Han shouts to be heard. "You listen. In our world, the one who listens is the one who holds the knife. Stop trying to be one of them. Be what you are. Be the one who sees the dirt." The words hit Nia with the force of a revelation. She had been trying to emulate Han's arrogance, his loud projection of power. But that wasn't her power. Her power was observation. Her power was the ability to read a room before anyone else even knew the temperature had changed. The proving ground arrived 3 days later at a high-stakes negotiation dinner with a rival syndicate from the energetic, chaotic port city of Incheon. The meeting was held in a private dining room of an upscale restaurant, a neutral ground that felt like a minefield. The leader of the Incheon faction was a man named Chairman O, a boisterous, laughing figure who poured drinks with one hand and threatened livelihoods with the other. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Minjun was stoic, but Nia could see the tension in his jaw. Director Han was there, of course, looking polished and smug, ready to lead the conversation. The negotiations centered on shipping lanes, officially for electronics, unofficially for things much less legal. As the dinner progressed, Chairman O began telling a long, winding story about his grandfather's fishing boat, laughing loudly, slapping the table. Director Han leaned in, whispering to Minjun that the story was just a drunken ramble, a stalling tactic. He urged Minjun to push for the signature now. He is weak, Han whispered in English.
He is drunk and rambling.
Press the advantage. Minjun looked ready to agree, reaching for the contract. But Nia was watching Chairman O's hands. She was watching the way the waitstaff moved around him. Too stiff, too attentive. She listened to the specific words O was using in his drunken story. He kept using a specific dialect word for net that also meant trap in an older, coastal slang.
He wasn't stalling.
He was signaling.
Don't sign, Nia said.
Her voice was not loud, but it was clear. It cut through the room like a bell. Director Han whipped his head around, his eyes bulging with rage. You silence yourself, he hissed. Mr. Park, sign the papers. Nia ignored Han. She looked directly at Minjun. The story isn't a story. It's a localized allegory. He's telling his men to wait for the signal. He used the word guangjil in the old dialect. That doesn't just mean fishing at night. It means burning the boat to catch the fish. She gestured to the waiter standing behind Minjun, whose hand was drifting toward his jacket pocket.
The staff.
They aren't staff. Look at their shoes. High-grip soles. Tactical. Not dress shoes. The silence that fell over the table was absolute.
Mignon fausse.
He looked at the waiter's shoes. Then he looked at Chairman O. The laughter died on O's face, replaced by a cold, deadly calculation. He realized his code had been broken. In that split second, the illusion of the dinner party shattered. Minjun stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. We are leaving, he announced, his voice like ice. The waiter reached into his jacket, but Mr. E, who had been standing by the door, was faster, stepping forward with a weapon drawn. The standoff lasted for a heartbeat, a breathless, terrifying second where violence hung in the air like ozone. Then, Chairman O chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He waved his hand, and the waiters stepped back. Smart, O said, looking past Minjun directly at Nia. Very smart. I thought she was just a pretty decoration. Minjun looked at Nia, then at Han, whose face had gone pale with the realization that he had almost led his boss into an ambush. She is not decoration, Minjun said, his voice ringing with a possessive pride. She is my voice. The drive back to the headquarters was silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of judgment or exclusion.
It was the silence of respect.
Director Han sat in the front seat, unable to look in the rear-view mirror, his arrogance punctured and deflated. Nia sat in the back, with Minjun. She was trembling, the adrenaline crash leaving her weak, her hands shaking in her lap. She had almost died. She had just called out a gang war in the middle of a seafood restaurant. She waited for Minjun to speak, to analyze the night, but he simply reached over and placed his hand over hers. His hand was warm, heavy, and steady. It was an anchor. He didn't say, good job. He didn't offer empty praise. He just held her hand, grounding her, acknowledging that they had walked through the fire together and come out the other side. When the car finally pulled up to the curb of her corporate apartment, Minjun turned to her. The streetlights cast shadows across his face, softening the sharp angles. Tomorrow, he said, we have a meeting with the International Board. Han will not be attending. You will be sitting at my right hand. Nia looked at him, and for the first time, she didn't feel the urge to look away. She didn't feel the need to shrink.
I'll be there, she said.
She stepped out of the car, and as she walked toward the entrance of the building, she caught her reflection in the glass doors. She didn't see the shy cleaner in the blue dress anymore. She saw a woman who walked with her head high, a woman who had learned that visibility wasn't given, it was taken. She was no longer a ghost haunting the hallways of other people's lives. She was the architect of her own. The world was loud, dangerous, and chaotic, but she finally had a voice, and she intended to use it.